So can I just come in there? I mean, I'm not an economist, but what you said, I understood, basically. And I think it fits in with my view of what should happen. And I think I know the answer to the question I'm going to ask. So why is it that people like Ed Balls and Ed Miliband are not saying what you're saying and exposing the lies that Cameron and Osborne and Clegg come out with?
Well, I think probably you can have some guesses at that answer. I think, look, in the case of Ed Balls, I think there's a very specific issue in his kind of personal history, effectively. Ed Balls was the man who persuaded Gordon Brown that basically doing a deal with the City of London would be a good idea. This is way back in 1992, he first became his advisor, having been leader writer on the Financial Times, if memory serves. Persuaded him that it was good that the city was doing so well, financial services were doing well, and that New Labour could basically do a deal with financial services, which is that we'll just let you do more or less what you want, and we'll kind of cream a little bit off to pay for hospitals. And that's kind of the deal that was struck. And the downside of the deal, of course, is that it means that you let them do whatever they want, right? And you let them do it for 10 years or so. That's exactly. And then when it crashes, it's a disaster. Now, it's hard, I think, for Ed Balls personally at that point to turn around and say, yeah, sorry, I was completely wrong. This was about the worst idea anyone's ever applied inside economic policy of the Labour Party in its entire history. Right? He's not going to turn around and do that, so that's his problem.
Why if it's the truth?
Why? Because he's a politician. I mean, so that's a really pat answer, isn't it? I think it'd be great if he did. I also think there's a specific, this is not really a left point, right? So I'm making a personal conjecture. I also think there's a specific thing with the Labour Party. There's an awful lot of people still signed up to this view as well. Oh, that's the truth of it. Yeah, there's a great chunk. If you look at the Parliamentary Labour Party, this is a great chunk of people who basically signed up to something like this. And they're very much part of a very particular political setup we have in this country that is geared to producing a certain set of outcomes, most of which centre on, we're really good at doing financial services, let's keep doing that, everything else is a little bit secondary. I mean, that's crudely the view of the world. That's not just MPs and party leaders and things. Miliband might be an exception to this. He might have all sorts of personal views, but whatever his personal views, I think he's constrained by how the Labour Party is now structured. The Tories, it's even more obvious. What is it, half of their funding now comes from like hedge funds, some ludicrous size. Just, you can see it. But it's deeper than that. There is a minister for the city. And the Chief Secretary to the Treasury is effectively a minister for the City of London, Minister for Financial Services. No other industry gets a minister sitting in the Treasury and appearing in the Cabinet. Nobody else gets that. You can see this entanglement, very, very deeply embedded entanglement, that's there between particularly the Treasury, the Bank of England, and the institutions of the City of London. This is quite a tightly knit group that has a particular view of how the world runs. You've worked in the Treasury for a while. You can see when you run into it that this is just how things have to be. So the whole setup is really quite tightly knot, I think, around this now. And New Labour played up to it by saying, no, it's all right, we can just leave this knot and we can still have nice stuff over here. So that's something else.
Unfortunately, I did expect that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, did you have a different reason?
But they can't do that anymore. It's gone.
They'll try it. Did you see Mark Carney's speech, Governor of the Bank of England's speech 2 weeks ago, 150th anniversary of the Financial Times? He basically says, look, we've had that period of time, we've had the crash, we've learned the lessons, everything's back to normal, the city is open for business, there's no reason why we can't have a City of London that's 7 times the size of the whole economy now, just balloon it, just grow and grow and grow. They believe this stuff, and it's to hell with the other consequences, I think, at this point. But I see lots of people putting their coats on.
It's the same. You are going to go.
You'll work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Another point.
Greg? Yeah, I work for an old education charity called the Works Education Association, and we used to run quite a lot of courses around economics and politics and stuff like that about 70 or 80 years ago. We tend to run a lot of leisure-based education now, and it's kind of hard. And I'm just wondering if you'd had any thoughts about how we start to popularise a people's discussion and education programmes around the issues of popular economics and this sort of stuff, something which certainly our organisation would be delighted to try and work around and work with, but actually it's real difficult recruiting people to come to sets of courses on economics in ways that we used to be able to do. I suppose some, and not never easy, but with some relative ease, you know, sort of 70, 80 years ago.
You talked about the need for growth in order to create more jobs and better jobs and to increase average earnings, median earnings, and the need to move money away from the region to the regions and for regional plan, which I can see all of that. What you haven't said really is the other side of the equity argument, which is how do you decrease the earnings of the financial people in the financial system? You've got to do both. You know, it's absolutely ridiculous what they're earning, and it creates a massive problem in our society.
I want to see something done about climate change, and as far as I can see, what's stopping it happen is that the whole world is in debt, everybody's in debt to everybody else, and they don't do anything because they've got to keep their profits coming in now so they can keep paying their debts so they can get more debts. And how can we break that cycle?
I'll go in order and try and be relatively quick. Yeah, that's a very good point about how do you teach economics. I think I've done a pretty dry presentation. Right? I hope you don't mind that I had graphs and writing and it went on, you know. But hopefully I covered a bit of ground. How do you popularise this? Well, people can do. David Harvey, who is a Marxist professor of geography, actually, but he's essentially a Marxist economist, did a rather brilliant talk at the RSA down in London about the crisis, about where the crisis came from, which they put to a little animation. You know, see his talks and the hand drawing people and all that sort of thing. It's about 2 million views now, you know, on YouTube. So it lasts about 10 minutes, and it gives you pretty good, like, this is how the crisis happened, this is what's going to take place next. Done, straight away through. So there is, I think, a space out there for that. And YouTube, yes, you can dig up cartoons and the rest of it. Now, if you want to get beyond just sort of watching a cartoon or watching a lecture and this sort of thing and get into how do you teach it, this opens, I think, really difficult questions for the teaching of economics. It becomes a real problem for how the discipline is structured as such, particularly in this country, I think. Here in America, the rest of the world is also pretty bad, but here in America especially. It gets you into a very deep problem that has started to manifest itself quite nicely, actually. There's been a 70% increase in applications to study economics at university over the last 3 years or so. Right? The reason's being obvious. People are going, well, God, you know, everything's kind of messed up. Why is this? This is actually quite an interesting question to consider. Not like when I was doing it, when the only reason to do economics really was because I wanted to get a job in the city, and that was that. You know? It was incredibly dull, and all the rest of it. Now it's actually quite interesting. So you troop off to university, you sit there, your first lecture, you think you're going to learn what's going on in the world, you know, what's been happening for the last about 4 years. What you actually get taught is about 3 years of maths, designed to prove that a free market is always right. Designed to prove, no less, that the crash of 2008 couldn't in fact have happened. Which is quite simple. Sorry? Yeah, I'm not. You tell people this. No, I can't. No, this is general equilibrium theory. This is the efficient markets hypothesis. This is what Eugene Farmer shared the kind of fake Nobel Prize in economics for this year. He was going to write out a theory that says financial markets are always efficient. That means that they always communicate information adequately. That means that any price you see in a financial market is, in fact, a true reflection of value, so bubbles can never happen. Because a bubble is, in fact, how much something is really worth. And there's a great big slew of maths and stats and things. Back on it's complete nonsense. The guy shared the fake Nobel, and I do call it a fake Nobel, by the way. This is like, you know, this was set up by the Swedish, the Nobel Prize. It's not actually called the Nobel Prize, it's the Award for Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel. It was established by the Swedish Central Bank in 1965, basically to promote free market economics. Like, you know, people talk about the University of Chicago as well, all these Nobel Prizes. Well, it's because the University of Chicago is Milton Friedman, right? It's where all the free market economists come from. So they have this fake Nobel Prize, because they want to pretend to be a science. It's not. The guy they shared it with was Robert Schiller, who was the person who basically said, well, actually bubbles can happen, irrational exuberance, herd mentality. You know, you see people in the financial market, that's precisely what they're doing, just charging around after numbers. Anyway, so you get taught, however, the Eugene Farmer side, you don't learn anything critical. And what's been interesting about that is, starting, I think, at Manchester, a group of students got together, called themselves a post-crash economic society, and tried to challenge what they're being taught, and that's spread a little bit. What it means for doing popular economics is the number of actual economics lecturers you can find who can teach you anything outside of the mainstream at all, because this has gone on for decades, this process, is incredibly low, incredibly low. So it's not like find someone to teach you. I think it has to be a kind of self-learning process or something here. You know, there has to be some other way of doing this. That was actually quite a long answer, sorry.
Can I make a suggestion there?
Yeah.
It's don't use the E word.
Yeah.
Because I think you explained, you talked about median earnings, about why your kid hasn't got a job when they come out of university. Yeah, I know that's economics, but that's what speaks to individual people. They want to know why. Just don't mention the E word. The people who run the food banks, they want something else. They feel like they're putting a sticking plaster over something. They feel they're complicit and they want an alternative. Yeah, I know it's economics, but just don't use the word and then you engage with people.
I'd suggest that's like a shift from alchemy to chemistry, because economics, as per the Chicago School, is about as scientific as alchemy. There's one or two things in it that work, but the rest of it's dogma.
No, I think it's a very good analogy. In fact, it's worse than that, because what's actually happened is that we've gone from chemistry to alchemy. That's the over the last at least 50 years or so. But it's a desperate state.
Why did these people, what have they got to gain from it? People like Friedman, who came up with this monetarism theory. What on earth have they got to gain for something that, if you applied any sort of common sense to it, was plainly nonsense? Did they gain financially themselves from it?
Do you know, this is, right, Adam Smith, just about the first economist, and I'll come back to you, just about the first economist, was quite correct when he said economics is a moral science. Right? So he said it's about science, in the sense that it's about analysis and understanding the world and how things fit together. But it's moral, so it's ultimately about values. It's very hard to understand human society, because we're all part of it, without having some kind of value system about how we approach the understanding of society. So it's a moral science. In the case of Milton Friedman, I don't have any doubt that he sincerely believed what he was saying was right. And that's why he was doing it. Because he was absolutely convinced by his own arguments. He thought he was right. This is his morality. This is his value system. Go and apply it. And that, I think, is why an awful lot of people do it. And it's very seductive. If you go into a standard economics course, any university, you get given what looks like, and you can do maths, you get given what looks like a set of magic keys that unlock every single major social question you can think of. You know, every single one. People sing Freakonomics. It's a sort of stupid book. It's economics as a parlour game. Two economists sit down and they try and explain, I can't remember the examples, but just ludicrous facts about the rest of society, about human behaviour, all on the basis that we're rational, calculating individuals, and this is how we operate, and therefore we can explain everything that everybody does. And if you do an economics course, you can explain individual behaviour, you can explain how economies move together, you can explain trade, you can do all this. And it's kind of like magic, you know, it's got a kind of secret knowledge appeal, sort of esoteric thing going on. So I think it's very seductive. Also, at the end, you might get a well-paid job in the bank, so it's like, it's a win-win. You know secret things, and they're paying you for it. What's not to like, right? That is the appeal of the thing. What's good now is that I think you're getting people doing economics who don't think like that, who want to know about the world.
James, thanks very much. I can't pay our debts now.
Yeah, what time do we have to wrap up? Because I'm not really keeping it. Right, okay, fine. On the word economics, you see, I'm in two minds about this. One, if you want to talk to loads of people, don't use big words and frighten them off. But two, I don't think people should be frightened about this stuff. This is stuff that's held up to frighten people. Oh, it's too complicated, you can't possibly understand. No, actually, forget that. Let's just go and grab the thing back again and say, you, with all your theories, have introduced a complexity. We're going to take this away from you, we're going to understand what's going on, and we're going to use that to challenge you. So I think there's something important there about sort of reclaiming the word, or reclaiming the idea at least. There was one other question, wasn't it?
High pay.
Sorry?
You haven't answered Nigel.
Which was?
High pay, yeah.
Yeah, oh, right, no, that's a fun one. I mean, look, there's all sorts of suggestions you can do here. I mean, the standard one with particularly with financial services. If you say, oh, if you take our bonuses away, we'll leave the country. Well, why do they want to say this? I say this on Newsnight. You just say, all right, yeah, there's your passport. We'll pay for your ticket. We'll apologise to wherever you end up. I'm really sorry. Just don't let me near a computer.
Isn't it true that there's a negative correlation between the pay of top FTSE 100 executives and their performance?
Yes.
So it's absolute nonsense that we need them to
It's
be
performance related then, isn't it?
Yeah. But back to front.
But it's not very well for you to say that, but how do you actually do it? I mean, I see Switzerland is trying to pass some sort of law, but how do you actually do it?
You know what I thought was really, this is like, again, it's not really left point, but it's one that appealed to me. It was Jean-Luc Mélenchon, candidate for the Front de Gauche in the last, my pronunciation will be all over the place. Candidate for the left front in the last French presidential elections proposed that they introduce a maximum wage of, I think it was €300,000, which to me sounds very generous. So why not do that? Yeah, I'll take €300,000. I'm quite, who in this room wouldn't? Why not do that? Why not make it 100,000?
Because you give bonuses, you'll give incentives, you'll give free cars,
Just
you'll
say-
do all sorts of things to get round it.
Sure. So you do one part, which is you introduce that maximum, and then you do the other part, which is you get into the nuts and bolts of how you're going to make banks behave differently. Don't have vast institutions basically able to generate money as they see fit, and then do what they want. It's pretty much literally a license to print money by that point. So that gets you into the other side of things, which is the fundamental reform of how finance operates.
Specifically on that, there was a proposal that came from a very interesting place just before the last election, and that was that firms would be limited to a 20-to-1 ratio of the least paid to the highest paid. The thing that's interesting is that came from a think tank within the Tory party that was trying to get that as a Tory manifesto commitment. And they got quite close to achieving it. It was absolutely amazing. But it actually
Switzerland as well, isn't it? It's all mentioned. They're introducing it, aren't they?
They're trying.
You could do that.
Okay, we've just got two more questions. This gentleman and then Alan. Finish with Alan for the knockout match.
So I was going to ask a question about underemployment. So is that people who want to work more or have to work more because they need more money? Because it seems that underemployment isn't necessarily a bad thing. If people are doing stuff for the rest of that time, that's productive, if that isn't counted GDP. And actually, that then means that there's more underemployment, that more people are employed potentially, because few people are working longer hours, more people are working fewer hours. So is there something there about looking at working time and looking at, would that be part of the solution to get around problems of unemployment?
This is the kind of perversion of it, where it's, yes, definitely, part of the solution is people work less. But if you work less, all most people as it stands, you earn less, you earn a lot less, and that's the problem. Underemployment, reported underemployment, it's a survey. You ask someone, are you working as many hours as you want? Now, what's actually happening in people's heads at that point is if I work more hours, I'll earn more. So you say, no, I'm not. Because they want to earn more. Not because they want to work more in most cases, because they want to earn more. So it's really about saying these people are not being paid enough. If you could do something that they were paid a reasonable wage for working those reduced hours, this would be ideal. But that implies a really big change in how the whole economy operates. Very, very substantial. Not what's going to happen under this government.
Alan?
Just something from the end there. I've very much enjoyed it, thank you. In your final slide about the future, there were 4 or 5 items, 4 or 5 question marks there. If investment is low and falling, certainly not growing, and that continues, it doesn't get better, as you say. If the labour market remains slack, as it seems to, especially with weak unions and no investment, which is adding to potable goods, so that's going to stay slack, which is a current situation. And if the bubble doesn't spread outside London, because frankly, it almost never does. That's the history of what's happened in the last 400 years in this country. What you're really saying to us is that we're facing, at the very best, a Japanese lost decade, aren't we?
Yeah, well, that's an easier one than I was expecting, I suppose, because it's yes. But with some difference, with some distinctions. The Japanese lost decade had a think about it. The Japanese lost decades, nearly 2 decades now, by the way, isn't it? It's like 1990. It's not involved the kind of immense dislocation, the huge appearance of inequality, the collapse in earnings, that's it's involved lots of unpleasantness, but it hasn't involved a lot of the things that we're going through. So what we've got is, I think, a more condensed version of it. Now, I suspect the ability of this economy to generate bubbles, at least you get some overspill effect elsewhere, particularly an increase in ability of people to borrow to compensate for falling earnings. Might well be enough to, but at the moment it's starting to look like it's delivering some growth. Some of it might also be finally the impact of the falling value of the pound, although of course that's being eroded rapidly. I suspect you might start to see, there are some elements there where you can start to see some improvements on the headline figures. Whether that turns into improvement that most people feel is another second question.
What I'm saying is that the reason why the real economy doesn't feel like it's growing is because it's not actually growing.
I mean, is there a difference between inflation and growth? Because there doesn't seem to be very different.
Well, this gets you to some measure. There should be. I mean, what you want to do is take account of whatever GDP earnings allowing for inflation. What you often get is not allowed for inflation. So you kind of, it looks like things are improving because you just add up the amount of money that's out there. Yeah. You don't take account of the fact that everything costs more. So it's meaningless. I mean, inflation is the other one that is doing peculiar things at the moment, probably as a result of cost of living. The net effect of, funnily enough, printing a load of money, even if most of it doesn't then arrive in the rest of the economy, is to have some impact on inflation. Certainly on asset prices, certainly on stock market inflation. Probably that's
how you can tell is the exchange rate.
Tell us something we can do.
Oh, that's interesting. God, I wish I'd thought that. I was slightly ignored. Well, it depends. It depends who you are and what you're doing and that sort of thing. I mean, in terms of just on the educational point, I think it's always. I think the more people who know at least a little bit about economics and can challenge, particularly what I think is going to be a rhetoric of it's a recovery and things getting better over the next 18 months, it would be very useful. It's just useful to be able to argue with people and convince them otherwise and try and win an argument, particularly if you've got a government and most of the media saying everything's getting better, everything's fine. If you can start to unpick that, then that helps. So I suppose one thing to do is read some economics. Watch David Harvey's lecture, actually, would be a good thing to do. That's not a very organisational point or necessarily a practical one, but it might help. How's that?
It's fine.
Would it not help the recovery if they did actually increase interest rates so that people like the huge numbers of pensioners who previously used to put a lot of money into the economy by buying things, now are in a position where they get no return on their investments and therefore you don't have as much money to spend. So it has been a disaster for older people to reduce the interest rates.
There is an argument on the kind of the sort of free market right that if you push interest rates up, what we've got at the moment is they're artificially low. That means a whole load of businesses that ought to go out of business are kept in work. It means a whole load of people who ought to go bankrupt are not going bankrupt. It means a whole load of people who have houses that are too big are still in those houses. So you put up interest rates and kind of clear out all of this, a little clearer space in which more competitive, fresh rounds of accumulation can occur, and all the rest of it. That's their kind of argument. The basic problem is, of course, you do actually then have to drive people into bankruptcy, close down companies, repossess houses, which is the real reason they won't touch interest rates, I think. The sensitivity of not just individuals to movements in interest rates. I mean, a number of interest rate only mortgages and variable rate mortgages now. It's gone through, again, it's not over the last few years. So people are incredibly sensitive to interest rates. I don't see any government wanting to go anywhere near touching things, just because there's huge panic and all the rest of it that will engulf them as soon as they do. And then, of course, the knock-on effect is that you just wipe out any recovery. Because I think if you look at the figures, this is based on consumer borrowing. Put up interest rates, people don't borrow, that's it. You're in a big recession.
But you keep them down, there's a lot of section of the community that can't spend.
Oh, yeah.
But the two sides of the interest rate argument are, unfortunately, as the growth in debt has said, the amount of benefit to savers that a raising interest will be, although it might be interesting for you if you happen to be a saver, nevertheless across the whole economy, because of the growth of debt, you would actually harm more people because there's a lot more debt out there than there is savings. Get the benefit. So it would net create, the term that James was steadfastly avoiding in what they talk about in terms of that clearing the decks is euphemistically called creative destruction. But what I want you to concentrate on is the creative part of that phrase and avoid the destruction part of it. But that's actually what happens, is the destruction.
Could you just tell me concisely as you can, the 2 or 3 things that you would actually do to improve the economic situation that we're now faced with? I mean, you mentioned things like control, for example, of the energy companies. Now, nationalisation has been a total disaster almost everywhere, as far as I can see. There's been little benefit from it. Work done by local authorities and the like is always more expensive than work done outside, and things like this. And I'm just wondering what you would actually suggest you should do to improve our balance of payments and our debt situation.
The issue, well, I take issue with the nationalisation has been a disaster, and of course there are some very successful, very competitive nationalised companies out there. Some of them operating here, they're not nationalised by this government, but they're nationalised by the French government or the German government. So it's not necessarily the case of nationalised companies completely efficient and capable of the rest of it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's any good for kind of wider social values either. I mean, the clear one we've had recent experience of it is East Coast trains, which is renationalising consistently. People report it is better than
it's working so well, they're selling it off again.
Yeah, well, of course, exactly. Right? And it's what they want to do with the banks, and this was always a thing. We'll nationalise it a bit and then sell RBS back to the private sector. Lo and behold, the private sector look at RBS, it's all a bit of a, it's a mess as far as those things go. So the key with nationalisation is not just that you change your ownership, you change how things run, you apply different priorities. Your point about legally, what does this institution think it's doing? Things like large banks should, in the end, be put under something like some kind of democratic control. How that is done, we can get the details. The board should be elected in some way. It should be accountable. It should be publicly accountable. You can't have an immense concentration of wealth and power like this that isn't accountable. So that would be one thing. If you start to do that, then you can start to open some of the floodgates for investment, and you can start to do immediate, obvious things that address wider social concerns, like very obviously climate change. So retrofitting houses, insulating roofs, that sort of thing. To get you out of, by the way, just saying let's freeze energy prices and the rest. You're right, there are problems. I think we're just saying let's freeze energy prices. But at the very least, there's an argument about, well, if you can do that, if you can fix prices here, if you can interfere with the market here like this, why can't you do it elsewhere? Which is kind of, that's a good argument to start to open up. I mean, I do think you'll run into serious problems if he tries to fix the prices of energy, precisely because large companies really won't like this. And it will have potentially some impact on the operation of feed-in tariffs and all sorts of other things further down the line if you take kind of sort of environmental view of that one. So you want to democratise things like banks, you want to put them under public control, you want to break them up, you want to get them investing into things that make sense to local economies. I think you'd also, as part of that, want to give more, what else would you want to do? I think redistribution is a serious issue. I think the spread and concentration of wealth...
It's a serious issue, but how do you do it?
What the obvious one is closing tax loopholes. I mean, people talk about loopholes like it's just a little thing. This is a systemic process of avoidance by basically very, very wealthy people, very large corporations, of what is essentially the social obligation of the rest of the space. So you get serious about closing these things. HMRC estimate, revenue and customs estimate for tax avoidance, it's tiny, it's 25 billion, and they have an incentive to talk this down because it kind of implies they're not doing their job. If you take a more serious estimate, you're up to £120 billion a year that you can easily take and put to good public use of some sort, whatever it is you want to do. Investing in education or health would be the obvious ones. On a more obvious, immediate, back to basics point of view, it's incredible what's happened to research and development spending, to spending on science in this country. We talk about graveyard science. Spending on scientific research has dropped and dropped and dropped, continually, since the 60s. I would certainly look to investing more in that, and I've concentrated on things like research in renewables, research in energy efficiency, and look to do something serious with this. So instead of spending that 1.5% of GDP, get up to 3, 5, 7%, something that's really, really big and serious in that way. You can invest in public transport. I think HS2 increasingly is just, it's ludicrous. It's not even a white elephant, it fits in with a wider plan, essentially, for how the economy should be structured. That everything is concentrated in London, and the rest is kind of, at best, a suburb to what London does. But if you're going to invest in public transport, I would certainly do something about the cross-country limits. It takes longer to get from Liverpool to Newcastle by train than it does to get from Liverpool to London. And the distance is, what, 50 miles less, a lot less. Right? You can invest in these sort of things. That reduces car usage, it does have an immediate environmental impact. I would make it easier to introduce community ownership and ensure that funding was provided to people who wanted to do community renewable schemes. So the one, who was it, you're talking about up in Preston, the Archimedean well, that they're going to generate electricity from using underground well that drives the hydropower thing. Make it easier to get financing for that sort of stuff. You can start to draw up a big long list of things that could happen.
How about reducing taxation?
Well, it depends. Depends on taxation through VAT on car.
The total taxation, total overall taxation.
Not necessarily. I think I'd shift the burden so it's more on the people who can bear it and less on the people who can't.
Okay, so thank you very much. That was really